Hey guys, it's Ken here, and today you're listening to the Autism Experience podcast. Hey guys, welcome to the Autism Experience podcast. I'm Ken Vu, the host of the podcast, and today we'll be discussing autism masking. As a quick review of what autism masking is, especially if you don't know about it, it's when you hide or conceal parts of your autistic behavior or traits that seem autistic or different to neurotypicals, often as a way to help yourself fit in with your peers and avoid being outed as someone with autism. It's a way of behaving that's not often noticed or talked about in regards to the autism experience, partly because of some misconceptions about how it works. For example, there's this common misconception that people can be cured of autism like you would with a physical ailment or impairment. And this usually happens with individuals that have very mild forms of autism or individuals that seem to improve over time to the point where they seem to behave in a way that's more acceptable among neurotypicals, which is a bit nonsensical because for a lot of these individuals, they either get better at managing it better or they're just good at hiding it, which is what autism masking is all about. Now, one question that often comes up is, what is autism masking? What causes it? Now, autism affects every individual differently, but the general cause of autism masking is often due to individuals with autism responding to a world that's generally geared towards neurotypicals, individuals that do not have autism, if anyone doesn't know what a neurotypical is. And in a world like that, there are certain norms and expectations that are imposed on people in society. Things like how to act, behave, and talk. And a lot of it kind of relates to many different factors. The way people in a typical area behave, tribalism, or even social media or mainstream media, or how there's common images of what might be considered an ideal version of what a person should be like, things like that. And I'll admit that that kind of topic is beyond that conversation. But anyway, the idea is that we live in a society that has certain norms or expectations on how people should act. And this often comes down in different forms too. It could be from the way people around you in school act, or these social groups that you get involved in that might have certain sort of under the surface expectations of how you should behave or what's allowed or what pop culture things you should be into, what movies you should watch or things like that. I mean, it's not exactly like a law saying, oh, you can't watch this movie. No, but we're speaking about norms and expectations. We're talking about sort of like this group thing kind of mentality that is kind of seen in different functions of society that seem to have people that are grouped together based on common interests or common beliefs and things like that. And for many people with autism, it can be very difficult to fit in, especially when you have interests that kind of don't follow what the trend is within a particular group. But mostly it's also can stem from having behaviors that are very different than what is expected of a neurotypical person. Behaviors like stimming, making noises, organizing things in a certain pattern, or just some of the behavior challenges that people with autism have, like having trouble with verbal communication or being able to talk to people, or doing things like saying thank you or using your pronouns properly. Some behavior quirks that have to do with people with autism. And now there's a whole list of it, which is beyond this discussion right now, and I think you guys could sort of look that up to get a sense of it because, again, everyone with autism, they're affected differently. And while there's certain common traits, there are certain unique differences within each individual case that makes them stand out. And back to where I was, sometimes a lot of the behaviors exhibited by mostly people with autism sometimes are ridiculed or frowned upon because they don't conform to this sense of what a person how a person should behave in whatever environment or society that you're in, as well as things that like bullying or other issues where there are those who feel the need to hurt other people, because in order to assert some sense of inferiority, or to sort of out of some sort of misconception that people with autism or any disability are weak and that they're unsuccessful and that they're incapable of doing anything better, which are all not true, and unfortunately forms a lot of the challenges that some individuals with autism face growing up. Things like bullying, harassment, or being excluded out of groups on purpose, or being left alone. And for a young child who's trying to get through school, trying to build friends and learning how to function as a member of society and contributing to it, it can be very difficult to do all those things when you're facing all of these hardships, because ideally you want to be a functioning independent adult, and you need essential skills and experiences to have a functioning and stable childhood. And when you're not in a position to make a lot of friends, or you're facing people who continue to just see you as this person with disability and make fun of you for that, it can be very difficult for all these experiences to come to fruition. And furthermore, with all of these external pressures to conform and to be like everybody else, it can be tough, because many of these behavior quirks that people have with autism have, are just a part of who they are, and it's a way they express themselves. It's a way they perform self-therapy on themselves, like things like stimming or finger tapping. All of those behaviors have some kind of function, or just part of who they are. And for someone in that situation, it could feel as if there's something wrong with you. And that's something that unfortunately is something that some individuals have thought about. And living in a world like that, there's this desire to fit in. And so what some individuals would do is they would try to hide these behaviors that are perceived as problematic or too different for other people to accept, or even try to mimic what other people do in order to fit in better. They would probably mimic how other people behave, keep a low profile, and try to do what everyone else does, like watch the same TV shows, pretend to be interested in group activities, or do what everybody else does. Like you see people all around you playing basketball. You may not like basketball, but you just do it because you want to be more accepted. You want to connect with people, and you want to find a sense of belonging, find acceptance. Be like, hey, I may not like basketball, but I'll play it just so I can connect with you guys, even if I don't like it, because I want friends, and I'll make quick friends with people by just doing what they're doing. Hopefully I get accepted that way. And so in a sense, you have this sort of, you feel compelled to follow what other people do in order to fit in and find acceptance, and above all, be considered as an equal. Like, to really illustrate these ideas, let's take an example from my own personal life. So in school, some of the behavior quirks I have was primarily talking to myself a lot. Like, I do that frequently. Like, I would be alone in my room and having these conversations with myself, and sometimes I would imagine that I'm talking to other people. And it's not just because I didn't have many friends back then. I mean, I did, but sometimes I'm in situations where I'm alone frequently, so I need a place for me to get my thoughts out. But it's mostly because it's a coping mechanism in order to help me deal with being alone so often. And because when I'm in a regular conversation, sometimes I have trouble coming up with ideas or talking because I'm afraid of being judged for what I say. And people who would just talk me down for having different interests or different beliefs than they do. And so it's often the case where I'm out of that conversation where I have all these wonderful ideas I want to tell people, because being alone, you're kind of in a space that you control. And if there's no one around, then who's there to judge you other than yourself? But every once in a while, like, it would slip out and I would talk to myself and people would notice, and kids would make fun of me for that, thinking that I'm crazy or stupid or something. And sometimes I don't know why they do that, but it happens, and human nature can be really cruel, and there's very little we could do about it. And this isn't just one day, but a series of moments like that where people pick on me for certain behaviors that I have, or just being in special education class. All of these incidents continuously happening over time to the point where it just bothers me, because here I am trying to make friends, trying to have a normal, stable childhood, and now having to deal with these extra hardships of just kids picking on me. And while I kind of enjoy my childhood in a way, I still felt like I was trapped, like I was stuck in a hole, and I'm trying my best to get out of it. So I tried to find a way to see if I could fit in somehow. And starting out, I had a lot of wrong ideas about how to reach out to people or be accepted. So one thing I did was I tried to distance myself from my friends in special education class, because I was worried that if I get seen around with them, like, people would continue to associate me with special ed. And if any of you guys are hearing this, I'm sorry, but it was a really tough situation, and it was a mistake that I regret. And so I tried doing that. I also tried avoiding the subject of special education whenever I can, like avoid talking about it, or even just steering away from it, because I wanted to disassociate myself from it. I mean, not that special education is wrong, but that there's this negative stigma that I sense in a lot of the students I encounter growing up in elementary school. So I thought by avoiding it, people would forget about it and think, hey, he's not just some special ed student, he's a human being. But even then, it wasn't enough, because even if I tried to get into what other people like try to watch the movies that other people like, or watch what people do, or try to talk like they do, I still felt like an outsider, because it felt like I was just censoring who I was, or just masking it, which is what autism masking is all about. And unfortunately, it's just so bad that, I don't know, I just gave up, and I just went to a deep depression after that, because no matter what I do, I still am not going to be accepted by other people, and people won't stop leaving me alone. But in a stroke of luck, my parents decided to move to a different area in the city. So that was kind of a bit of a lucky move on my parents' part, because in a new environment with new friends and new people, it's easier to assimilate and really integrate myself into everyday human life, because people don't know about my past. I can have a fresh start, and it was largely successful when I started to go to a new middle school. I got to make more friends. I was able to just get a chance to fit in better. I would just follow along with what other people do, have an open mind when it comes to friends, and try to get to what into and things like that, and practice a bit of autism masking in a way. I try to make sure I don't talk to myself in front of people. I try to, when I stim or start tapping and start like messing with my fingers on stuff, like I would rub my hands against tables or tap or shake my leg, make sure I don't do that in public so people don't see, and all that. And it works for the most part. I was able to have good friends, and I was able to have a normal, stable friendships, and life was good. But in the end, there's this biting feeling that something was wrong with me. Like, I wasn't happy where I am. And it wasn't until, it was about probably, high school, when I started to realize that perhaps some of that unhappiness comes from the fact that I'm suppressing parts of myself in order to be accepted by everyone else. And that all this discomfort I'm feeling comes from the fact that I'm not letting myself be myself. And that if I don't do anything about it, I could have an uncontrollable outburst that comes from years and years of discomfort, just hiding who I am for so long. And it's just sickening, which to just have to do that, which leads me to another point I want to bring up. And I think this is a question that some people might wonder is, what is dangerous about autism masking? Well, autism masking, despite how much it could help, though, and in the social lives of other people, it could leave people to feel burned out. Like for some, they would sometimes spend so much time masking themselves that sometimes it just tires them out of having to suppress it. And they might feel like they're living a lie, like they're lying about who they are. Having to simply just follow what everybody else is doing, do what the world wants them to do, to the point where, as I've said, all this discomfort could create mental breakdowns or even create a deep depression from not being able to be yourself, or worse, like if you don't have an outlet to be yourself and allow yourself to just be free, without any judgment, or a space that's free from all the expectations that society imposes on other people. It can be very distressing. And back to that lying part I was talking about, it links to another common phenomenon that you may have heard of, imposter syndrome. The sense that you don't deserve all the praise or achievements you have. Like you feel like you're not exactly who you are, despite what people think you are. And a lot of it comes with autism masking because, number one, people that mask might feel like they're lying about who they are, because with autism masking, you're keeping parts of yourself hidden so people only see what you give them. You often try to be normal, and so you adopt certain behaviors, certain traits, certain quirks in order to fit in, be accepted. So you might get this sense that you're acting differently depending on the people you're talking to, or the context, or the situation you're in. So it might seem like you're duplicitous, like you're playing on certain roles, like you're shifting personalities or something like that. Like you're not someone to be trusted, who's kind of manipulative or something like that. It's just a common misconception for people who try to understand autism masking, or kind of recall the fact that a guy who they think is normal is somehow different when they're just stressed from all this discomfort they have towards trying to be like everybody else, living in a society that's geared towards neurotypicals and kind of shuns people that are not neurotypical. And number two, second reason for how autism imposter syndrome is related to autism masking is that with imposter syndrome, for some people that mask a lot, there's a general feeling, and for some, that they don't deserve to be considered autistic because autism comes in many different severities. Some people are more or less have it differently than others. Some people might have it severe to the point where they're nonverbal, like they can't talk, or like they're not able to take care of themselves or get their basic needs met, like being able to take showers by themselves, being able to walk or move around or get a job or be able to walk. Whereas there are others that are, I guess, kind of like have a milder case of autism. Like they're able to take care of themselves and get a job and get married and have kids, but they still are affected in some way. And for those people, sometimes the autism in an individual could be less intense to the point where it might feel like you don't actually have it when you kind of do. It's just very well hidden, or that you learn how to manage it better to the point where you just don't quite notice it. And because of that, for these individuals, particularly those with less severe autism, there's sometimes commonly there might be a feeling of doubt if you actually have autism or not, or that you're actually faking it. It makes you feel like you don't deserve to be called autism, or that you're trying to make yourself seem like you have a disability when you don't, when actually you do. It's just not very severe. And so, while this is kind of a new thing I've discovered, so my thoughts on it are a little bit shaky, but what I could say is that if you ever get a diagnosis for autism and you do feel like you don't have it, it's important to remember what's driving the diagnosis and understand what the diagnosis is about. Read about autism, educate yourself, and learn more about it, because a diagnosis doesn't just come from a simple doctor visit. Like, people don't just look at you and like, oh, you're autistic, just like that. No, it's a series of evaluations that happen over time, that with all this information collected and analysis, from then on, they use that to get to this diagnosis that you might be getting. So remember that it's very thorough, and it doesn't just come like magic. A diagnosis takes a long time to reach to, and that's important to know that. All right, and so the last reason is that for some, they might feel like they don't deserve the success that they've gotten with their lives, whether it's work, home, family, etc. And this one hits fairly close to home because I've experienced this quite a bit myself, because I have a less severe case of autism. I'm pretty mild. Like, I can function, take care of myself, and give myself a bath, and do homework, and go to college, and go to school on my own with minimal parental supervision. But there are times where I feel as if I don't deserve to be successful, where even though I have a degree right now from San Jose State, and I volunteer and have a regular job and have a couple of friends to talk to, sometimes I feel like I don't deserve to be this successful, because having grown up with this belief that I can't succeed because of what other people have told me, or that I can't learn or do what neurotypical kids do, I got this feeling where, do I earn this? Did I actually work hard for this? I mean, even if I did work hard, I feel like I don't deserve it. And sometimes it relates to my experiences in my special education classes, where I had friends in those classes that had a more severe case of autism than I do, or even more intensive learning or intellectual disabilities. And sometimes I feel sad that, that they're not able to get what I wanted. Like, they're not able to get what they want. Because sometimes I witness incidents where you have parents being told by the teacher that, in spite of all the effort that's done to take care of their kids, they have to accept the fact that for some people with severe disabilities, they may not be able to, succeed in a regular course setting, or be able to get a job or something. And that for some parents, they have to take care of these kids for the rest of their lives, which can be a huge financial burden. Because the question remains, like, if the parents pass away or are in no position to take care of them financially, what happens to them? And that's a question that no one wants to think about, or no one wants to have to ask, or even get to, or no, because ideally, you want to take care of every student and help them be successful as much as possible. And you don't want to go down to that point where you start asking that question. Sometimes it makes me feel worried about them, because the more I started assimilating to regular mainstream coursework, the more I kind of had to sort of leave behind my friends into my special education class. Because as I started to get more into them, I started moving out of these special education classes, and they started going to different programs, across the state, that are sort of designed for students like them, like a more higher level of special education, a more advanced form of special education. And so with people moving about and all, sometimes I get worried, because while I'm doing well with school and, having a normal social life and trying to build myself up to be a strong, independent, hardworking adult, I have to leave some people behind, because I feel like if they that some people deserve it to have that, or be able to be successful. And it's hard accepting that there are some people that are in a position where they're going to struggle really hard, or it's very difficult for them to get that. But in spite of these uncomfortable feelings I have, I sometimes try to remind myself that, that I'm sitting on an opportunity that not everyone has, because education is a privilege. It is. Being able to read and write and speak, it's a privilege. And it's one that not many people have control over. I mean, you could teach a class on reading and writing, and it could have some improvement, but a part of it also has to do with the nature of your disability and lots of other things, and it can be very difficult to navigate around that. And so I've always tried to remind myself whenever I feel a little bit down or feel a sense of imposter syndrome is that, this is an opportunity no one gets, and I'm going to have to keep working hard as much as I can because people would want this opportunity as much as I do. And to waste it or aim low is not only a disgrace to me, but a disgrace to them, kind of telling them that it's not worth trying hard or that they shouldn't even bother getting a better life for themselves. And while, however disconcerting that may sound, it's kind of been helping me kind of live normally. And even though there are students that are having trouble, succeeding in terms of education at all, I still, and having experienced that, I still feel like it's my duty to give back to people, which is why I volunteer for Best Buddies and work and get involved in the community, because I understand how much of a privilege it is to have an education and to be able to read and write and do well. And I want to help people do the same, though, because I never really had that much help growing up, and I wanted to be that kind of person that would be there and be that help for someone who needs it. So that's kind of my little thoughts on that. And so while I've been kind of talking about what autism masking, like what makes it dangerous, there's also some benefits to autism masking. There's some good ways to make use of it, because despite all the negativity around it, it can actually benefit people. And one of the ways it can benefit people is by sort of helping people learning how to adapt to different environments. Because if you're going to be in the working world, you got to understand that every company, every organization has its own rules and regulations about how things should be done. And it's important to remember that sometimes you may not always have your way, and that there's certain codes of conduct that you need to follow in order to be respectful to other people, and as well as serve the communities that you're serving and organizations as well. Because you might even at some point come across someone with a disability like you, but they're bothered or have certain preferences for certain things. Like a guy with autism, for example, might be sensitive to the sound of rock music, while a guy with autism, a different guy, sure, they have the same disability, but this guy is not sensitive to rock music and doesn't get bothered by it. So you have people with all these differences and likes and dislikes, and so autism masking can help you kind of hide all those behaviors or things that might offend people or not be appropriate for certain situations. And while it may sound like, it sounds like autism masking is basically kind of repressing that side of you, that real version of you, it can actually help from what I've learned, is that it could help with redirecting those behaviors into a less noticeable way. Like, for example, if my quirk is talking to myself, so instead of just talking to myself when I'm alone and risking, getting noticed by other people, perhaps bothering people, let's say if I'm in a library, I try to find other ways to externalize it. Where instead of saying my thoughts out loud to myself, I try to see if I could write it in a diary, write my thoughts down in a diary and put it there. It's quiet, it's subtle, and it's probably not disruptive since I'm just writing on a piece of paper. I'm not yelling out loud where I could disturb people. Or even doing a podcast, though, which kind of normalizes it. Because as I've mentioned before, a lot of my great ideas for podcasts comes from these conversations that I have with myself, though. And being able to sort of have an excuse for talking to myself by saying I'm on a podcast, it kind of normalizes it and makes it less weird for some people. Although that doesn't mean that I won't stop talking to myself, but I still do. But it just means that I have my other ways of managing. If for some reason, like, I really need to talk to myself and I don't have a space to do that. Or another way is that, from what I've read, though, to my understanding, is that autism masking can be used as a temporary shield, for the day. Like when you go to work, you put on a slight autism mask to kind of fit in with the people that you're working with, the people around you. And then when you go home and, you make a space for yourself where you can just be yourself and create an environment for you where you can comfortable be yourself without being judged. Like maybe like a quiet space in your bedroom area where you can just do whatever you want and you won't be judged for it. Like if you like video games, probably should play video games at work, but create time, in your life at home, like a space that's quiet and peaceful for you to peacefully play video games without being disrupted. So something like that are some good ways to make use of autism masking in a way that's not disruptive, but also allows you to kind of be yourself and see the light of day. And so in an overall holistic sense of autism masking, I feel like it's a phenomenon that needs to be addressed and looked at thoroughly, because while there's lots of resources that talk about autism masking, there's still a lot to understand about autism masking that's beyond the simple good, bad, and right and wrong debating. Thus, I'm happily open to any feedback or comments or questions about this topic. So leave them down in the comments below on YouTube, Instagram, or just directly message me, because I want to be able to learn more about these things and learn what you guys have to say. Because while I have some experience with these kind of topics, there's still a lot I need to learn, and it helps being able to have a civil discourse, civil discussion about these things. That way we can come to a better understanding of these things, because these are issues that affect us every day and affect people all around us. And it's important to be able to have these kind of conversations or discussions so that way we can come together, come to understanding, and work together to make things happen. All right? With that said, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and hope to see you in the next one. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to my podcast. If you guys like my content, check out and subscribe to my platform, The Autism Experience. Available now on Spotify, Anchor, and YouTube. For social media, you can follow my Instagram account under the handler, The Autism Experience. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more from The Autism Experience.